Hi guys, welcome to God Nod. If you are new here, I share videos of God working in my life and sometimes random topics like this. And today I'm going to talk about silence. And I know that's sometimes a word that is kind of scary because silence is hard, but I think it's worth talking about. And I just want to talk about it today with you because the Lord put it on my heart to talk with you about it. And something that brought me to this attention is I went on this retreat to help out and to give a couple talks and whatnot, and was leading a small group, and there was like 25 high school kids there. And something that amazed me was that not one of them had ever taken the time to think about what their purpose on earth was. None of them had taken the time to think about, why am I here? Just wake up one morning and think, what am I doing here? None of them have had the time to think about this. And this just blew my mind because for me, I think about my purpose every day. And that's what gives me joy and happiness, and that's what gets me going every day. And so, to me, it's just crazy to think about not ever thinking about that. And so, I just want to talk about that a little bit and talk about silence and how much fruit can come from silence. I know as times come, it's becoming harder and harder to enter a world of silence, with our technology and just social media and the world and everybody talking. It's so hard to ever come to any place that has silence. And it's I've become aware that kids growing up and even my generation has had very little time in silence. And when I was a summer missionary over this summer, we had a time where we put all of the middle schoolers in half an hour of complete silence, just out in the wilderness. They weren't allowed to talk to anyone. They were just supposed to be by themselves in nature. And these kids absolutely loved it. Some of them, it was kind of hard at the beginning, but then they fell in love with it because they've never experienced anything like it before. They've never had that time to just immerse in silence and think on their own. And so I think it's super valuable and something that I think we should be forcing and disciplining ourselves to do more. The reason why silence is so important is because God speaks in silence. Silence is the language of God. And we are coming into this world with generations that don't know how to just sit still and listen. We can't just be still in silence. And if that's true, if we are becoming a nation where we don't know how to sit in silence, how are we going to hear God? If God speaks in silence, how are we going to hear God? And hearing God is super important, right? There's this monk, I don't know where I heard this from or who it was, but there was this monk that promised that if anyone wanted to hear God, he would promise that if you just spent 10 hours in complete silence consistently for 10 hours, you would hear God. He promised that. And I think it's true. There was even a documentary done. I think his name is Abbot Christopher Jamison? I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. But he is a super big believer in silence, and he would take these people on silent retreats, right, for a whole week of silence. And they were all atheists, right? So they were people that were willing to go on this retreat just for the sake of it. And they were all atheists in the beginning, and by the end of the week of the silent retreat, every single one of them ended up hearing God speak to them. There was a total of 3 episodes on this documentary, and I will link the links below if you guys want to watch them because they are super, super powerful. If we don't have silence, then we can't hear God, and if we can't hear God, then we are lost. Our society, we just hear so many voices coming into our head. We have no time just to sit and think on ourselves and just pray in silence with God. And so we need to be found. We need to be found by God, and we need to give God a chance to speak to us. How many times do you go to prayer and just be like, okay, God, I'm listening? Right? How many times do we do that? We usually just come to God and say, okay, this is my day. This is what I need. Okay, now, God, I put this in your hands. But instead, what would happen if we came to God and be like, okay, God, I'm listening. It's your turn to talk. There's this man from the 16th century. His name is Blaise Pascal. And he claimed that all of humanity's problems stem from a man's inability to sit by himself for 1 hour. Yeah. I recently read a book called The Power of Silence by Cardinal Robert Sarah. And I just want to pull a couple quotes from this book and let's reflect on them. One of these quotes, it says, "The uneasiness does not come from the silence itself, but about what it reveals." How many of us think that silence is hard? Most people would say yes. If I were to tell you, hey, I want you to sit down for 20 minutes and just sit there in silence. Don't look at anything, don't read a book, don't look at your phone, don't do anything, just sit there in silence. Would that be hard for you? I know for most of us, it would be yes. But that's because of what silence reveals to us. The thing is, silence isn't the enemy, right? The uneasiness that we feel when silence comes, it's not the silence itself, but it's about what the silence reveals to us, because it starts to reveal things that are in our heart. Silence not only reveals God to us and lets us hear God, but it also reveals ourselves to us, and that's what we don't like. We don't want to deal with some of the things that are inside of us, inside of our hearts. Silence is like a magnifier. It takes what's inside of us, inside of our heart and soul, and it brings it up to the surface. And that's when we're like, oh, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to deal with it. And that's why we don't like it. That's why we feel disturbed and uneasy about silence, is because it brings these things up. But these are things that we need to deal with. So what I want to invite you to do is, instead of just taking silence and putting it on the shelf and be like, no, I don't like silence. I come into conversation with people and they're like, oh, well, silence isn't for me. That might be for other people, but silence isn't for me. And what I'm telling you guys is, no, silence is for everyone. It's not just for certain people, because God speaks in silence. Heaven is silence. Heaven is going to be full of silence. The language of God is silence. And of course, there's going to be praising and stuff, but it's going to come from our souls and our hearts. That's what it is. You all might know Father Mike Schmitz, right? And he has a lot of YouTube videos, and he has a video on silence as well, because it's important. But one thing that he mentions in his video, which I think is super interesting, is he said that his parents would tell him, if when he came to his parents and he'd be like, Mom and Dad, I'm bored, we've all had that experience, they would say, no, things aren't boring, people are. Things aren't boring, people are. And so if you are bored, don't know what to do, just immerse in that boredom. Sit in that silence, because that's where creativity comes out of, is that boredom. Another quote I want to share with you. Here it is. It says, "Man has lost the simplicity of childhood. This is why silence is so difficult for him. And man rejects silence even more because he wants to become God himself." We reject silence because we want to control our life. We don't want God to tell us what to do, right? We want to be the controllers. And when we reject silence, we're rejecting God. We are trying to say, no, I got this. We might not know we're doing that, but that's basically what we're doing. And we've lost the simplicity of childhood. Let's be a child. Let's run around. Let's be free. Let's sit down in silence and think about things and reflect on our purpose and our life mission. Now, here's a quote that I just really, really love, because it really wraps the essence of silence all together. And so this is what it says. It says, "Contemplative silence is a silence with God. This silence is clinging to God, appearing before God, and placing oneself in his presence, offering oneself to him, mortifying oneself in him, adoring, loving, and hearing him, listening to him, and resting in him. This is the silence of eternity, the union of the soul with God." So silence isn't just trying to force yourself to not think anything or whatever, but it's just placing everything you are in front of God and just being present with the Lord in silence. It's all of those things, just giving oneself to God and listening and being present and loving and adoring God. One last quote I want to point out is actually from Mother Teresa, and she said, "Read the gospel attentively, and you will see that Jesus sacrificed even charity for prayer. And do you know why? To teach us that without God, we are too poor to help the poor." So there are some times where we have to be able to sacrifice loving people and doing things for people in order to spend time with God in silence, in order to pray, because we can't do anything without prayer. And true prayer is that silence with God. If you look at the saints, you will hear these stories of how they would just sit in prayer for hours and hours. Contemplative prayer. Like 6, 7, 8 hours at a time, just sitting there in prayer and full communion with the Lord. Wow, what a goal to have, right? To be able just to sit there for 6 hours and love it, love absolutely every single second of it, and then coming out of that prayer thinking, wow, that went fast. Like, can you imagine feeling that way? So, what I want to propose to you is a challenge to you, a challenge to me. Something I try to work on all the time is silence, because it's hard. But I want to challenge you right now, or whenever you have time, to take time for silence. Sit there for 10 minutes of silence. Set a timer on your phone and just sit there and close your eyes. And just sit there in silence and offer yourself to God. And don't like force things or whatever, but just sit there and be with the Lord. And if that's easy for you, go 20, go 30 minutes. See how far you can go. And if that's hard for you, then that means you know what you need to work on. Right? Silence is hard, but it's worth it because that's where God encounters us. So, if you find yourself trying to sit in silence and it's becoming hard, continue at it. Do like 5 minutes of silence a day and let it grow. Like that's where your true prayer out of your heart will come from. And then eventually, when you get used to the silence, like a lot of the things that come from your heart that you don't want to mess with or you don't want to deal with, they will start, invite God into that, and He will start to heal those things. And then you after a while, you will come to the point where it becomes complete peace. And you will be able to experience what those saints talk about in that contemplative prayer of just being able to just sit there for 5 hours and it feeling like 20 minutes. That's the goal. So I challenge you guys, I invite you to start incorporating silence into your everyday life because it will be a game changer for the rest of your life. Thank you guys and God bless.